The Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art takes us back in time. Picturing Indian Territory, 1819 to 1907, is the latest featured exhibit.
These are portraits of the Cherokee chief John Ross, one of the most notable political figures in Cherokee history, but also in the history of Indian Territory.
Mark White is the museum director.
John Ross, of course, resisted Indian removal. He took the United States government to court in the Supreme Court, ultimately lost, but became a real advocate for tribal rights here in Indian Territory.
The exhibit includes oil paintings, drawings, and art from news publications.
I think that there were a number of interests that the artists and journalists that came from the outside had. I think that for many Americans in the 19th century, Indian Territory was a mysterious place. So there were a lot of artists that were very interested in the tribes and the native nations that were here, especially after the Trail of Tears. There was a lot of interest in how the new arrivals, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, were faring in this new land after they had been removed from their homelands in the southeast. There was an interest in the politics, so in some cases you see representations of really interesting political events. Probably one of the most notable is a painting by John Stanley of the International Indian Council of 1843. And that was an attempt to bring together all of the tribes of this area, really as an interest in self-determination, trying to map out their own political future.
This goes beyond just Oklahoma history.
Right. And that was, I think, one of the things that we really wanted to do with this exhibit was to show that Indian Territory was not isolated, but that it was involved in American politics in general. There was a lot of important historical events that happened here. The Indian Territory was for a while part of the southern route to California during the gold strikes. It was instrumental in the Civil War, especially for the Confederacy.
This is the first scholarly examination of the visual history of Indian Territory. It took curators about a decade to research and gather the images. The items come from prestigious locations, the Smithsonian. Local museums include the Philbrook and Gilcrease, and private collections.
There's a lot of history that is captured by these images, and I think one of the objectives of this exhibit was to really demonstrate that visual imagery was a way in which 19th century audiences understood what Indian Territory was, what was happening, who the people and the places were. Even though photography had come to the United States really at the end of the 1830s, it was still not practical or really even technically possible to include a photograph in a publication. And so what you have are often engravings, and those engravings, which are created by artists, are sometimes subject to interpretation.
The exhibit attracts not only historians, families with children are exploring the state's early history in a very visual way.
I think it would be a good jumping off point because you can show pictures and sculptures and artwork. I think it's just an easier way for them to get the concept if they can see something and then hear about it as well.
There's been some really fantastic people that have contributed to the history of this state. There are some really tragic events that have occurred over the history of this state. But there is nothing quite like it anywhere in the nation or the world. And we wanted to demonstrate that in part through the imagery of this exhibition.
Picturing Indian Territory tells a unique story, the good, the bad, through artists, illustrators, and journalists of that time. In Norman, Quintran, Discover Oklahoma.